Okay, Professor Jim Schultz here from my Finance 512 class. I wanted to go ahead and shoot a video on margin. I know I kind of talked about that in class, how I might do that. This is something that I expect you guys to kind of learn on your own. This is something I expect you guys to kind of independently study. But I really thought that to kind of help you along that path, it can be a fairly complex, somewhat complicated topic. So I thought it would be useful for me to take 5, 7, 8 minutes here, and let's go ahead and shoot a video on how to handle, we'll call it regular margin, so to speak, and how to handle the margin on a short position. Okay, so my hope for this video is that it can really guide you through your understanding of these topics. As you can see, I have the solutions to the Chapter 3 problems up on the screen. I think while I teach you the concept, it makes sense for me to do it embedded within some of the problems you're already working on. So let's go ahead and get started. That's kind of going to be our plan of attack. So I'm actually going to start with number 16 here in a second. I'm going to do number 16 and number 23. But before I do that, the essence of margin, whether you are talking about a regular margin account or you're talking about a short margin account. Now, what do I mean by regular margin or short margin? Well, it's really simple. The idea behind margin is just that you have the ability to borrow money from your broker. Okay, so if you want, so a quote-unquote regular margin account would simply be you have $5,000 in equity and you call your broker up and say, hey, I want to go on margin for another $3,000, right? So you would have $8,000 total. What you essentially have in that scenario is $5,000 of equity and a $3,000 loan that you must repay to your broker, okay? And so that's kind of a quote-unquote regular margin account, which I would just refer to as a margin account. And then as we talked about in class, as I believe Kendall kind of brought this up in class, if you want to be able to short stocks, if you want to be able to have the privilege of shorting stocks in a real money account with live bullets, so to speak, you have to be approved for a margin account. Because in that scenario, you're not borrowing money, as we talked about in class, you're borrowing physical shares. But you still have a liability on your hands, right? You have to return those shares. So you have to be, vetted as, someone who can be trustworthy, let's say. And so, your experience level as a trader, the amount of money you have, the amount of money you make, all that stuff comes into play. But I'm not going to, that's not the purpose of what we're doing here. But that's what I mean when I talk about, a margin account and then a short account that requires margin privileges. Okay, so let's get started. Regardless of which one you're talking about, a margin account or a short sale that requires margin privileges, this guy right here up at the top, this equation that says, don't even worry about the word initial right now. It's not really pertinent to the point I'm trying to make right now. Margin equals equity divided by stock value. That is always true, 100% of the time. You can hang your hat on this equation right here. This guy is going to guide you through any margin problem that you have to solve. This is always going to point you in the right direction, regardless of whether or not you're talking about a standard margin account or a short sale that requires margin privileges. This is going to be the guide that you want to use. Now, it's going to look a little different depending on which one you use, but this is going to be the guide that's going to get you there. Okay, so I want to actually go down and do number 23 first, because I think it'll make more sense. 16, as we saw in class, understanding a short sale when you've never been introduced to the topic before, it's kind of confusing, right? You're like, wait a second, you mean I can sell something I don't actually have? Well, yeah, you can. That's kind of how the markets are designed and how they're structured. And so let's do the short sale example here in a minute. Let's do number 23 first, because number 23 is kind of your standard cookie cutter margin problem. Okay? So, you borrow $20,000 to buy Disney, DIS. The current price per share is $40. The initial margin is 50%. The maintenance margin is 35%. Okay? 2 days later, the price falls down to $35. Okay, so let me just talk a little bit about what some of this information is telling us. First of all, the maximum level, the maximum amount of margin that you can borrow is an initial margin of 50%. Okay, that is the most you can borrow. You cannot borrow any more than that. Now what does that mean? Well, let's look over here. If you're gonna borrow $20,000 to buy Disney, and your initial margin is 50%, that means you must have $20,000 in equity. Okay? Now let me scroll up real quick. Like if you look at number 15, this problem actually asks you to solve for the initial margin. So I would strongly encourage you to try to work that out after we do number 23. And this is kind of your more standard approach to initial margin. But down here, the problem told me the initial margin was 50%. I didn't have to solve for it. I was given that information. If I borrowed $20,000, what that initial margin of 50% means is 50% of your account is a loan. 50% of your account has been margined. 50% of your account is a liability that you must repay. So if I borrow $20,000 and my initial margin is 50%, that means my total account must be $40,000. Because an initial margin of 50% of $40,000 is $20,000. So in this situation, you've borrowed $20,000 and you have $20,000 in equity, cash or UST bills, whatever it might be. I hope that was clear. It's kind of again, when you see this stuff for the first time, it's not super simple. When you've worked these problems, my hope is that it becomes a lot easier for you. But I hope that was kind of clear. And if it's not, let me know in class or email me or text me or whatever. I want you guys to really understand this stuff. Okay, the maintenance margin is 35%. Okay, so what does that mean? Okay, so you establish your initial margin, whatever it might be. It might be 50%, it might be 60, it might be 70. The minimum value that it can be is 50, which is another way of saying the most you can borrow to open up a margin account is the amount of equity you have in that account. So in this case, we have $20,000 in equity. The most that I can borrow is $20,000. I can't have $20,000 in equity and borrow $40,000. My margin would be too low at that point. And so the minimum value of your margin is 50%. Now, what happens if you open up an account with an initial margin of 50% and then the stock moves against you right away? Okay, whether you're long or short, doesn't matter, don't worry about that. Just think, hey, you want the price to go up and it goes down, you want the price to go down and it goes up. So what happens? Well, once the price starts moving against you, like in this case, when we opened this position, the current price was $40 a share. Now it's $35 2 days later. So this thing we bought, right? We bought Disney, so we want the price to go higher. The price went lower. So this moved against us. So what that does is it starts to eat away at your margin. So your margin level will start to fall from 50% to 49 or 48 or 47. Okay? That's where this maintenance margin level comes into play. The maintenance margin is this. Okay, you posted 50% initial margin to open this account. All right. If the stock starts to move against you, you don't have to do anything unless that thing falls below the maintenance margin level that is set by your broker. Okay, your broker is going to determine what the maintenance margin level should be for your account. It's usually 25 or 30 or 35%. As long as your margin level stays above 35%, remember it started at 50, right? If the stock moves against you, it goes down. As long as it stays above 35, you don't need to add any additional cash to your account. But once it falls below 35, you're going to get a call from your broker. And it's 2015, so it probably won't be a call. You'll probably get a tweet or a text, right? Or you'll get, a Snapchat coming your way that's going to say, hey, you've got to post more cash. You've got to post more margin or we are going to liquidate your position immediately. Because the broker is not going to put himself in a position to where you can't repay your loan, right? So he's going to look out for his best interest. So that's what maintenance margin means, okay? All right, so I actually don't have my textbook with me. And so I kind of have to, I think I remember what the questions were, but I may have them slightly off. And so the basic idea here was, one of the questions was, all right, with the stock having fallen to 35, will we receive let me start that again. Now that I'm looking at the answer, I think the where I was going was not exactly correct. What we need to solve for is what price will trigger a margin call. So if the maintenance margin is 35%, what stock price will trigger a margin call? The stock started at 40, right? We bought that stock, so we want the stock to go higher. If the stock goes lower, we get hurt. As the stock goes lower, how low can it go before I'm going to get that text or that tweet or that call from my broker saying, hey, I need more margin? Okay? Well, this is where you have to go back to that margin account, which is equal to the equity that's in your account divided by the stock value. This is always true. Okay? So the numerator represents the equity that's in your account. Now remember from accounting, right? You've all had accounting, that you have to have had accounting to be in this class. This is the most basic accounting principle that every single one of you knows. Assets equals liabilities minus equity, right? So flip that around. What if we were solving for equity? Equity would be equal to assets minus liabilities. So in this case, the stock that we own is an asset. We bought 1,000 shares, right? We bought 1,000 shares, which was found by taking our total account, what we borrowed, and our equity, and dividing by the stock price per share. So I bought 1,000 shares. Well, I own that stock, so it is an asset, right? So whatever price it might be selling for, multiplied by the number of shares I have, represents the value of that asset. So this is the asset portion of our numerator. Now, remember, I originally borrowed $20,000 to open up this account. That is a liability, right? So assets minus liabilities is equal to equity. That's how you find your numerator. Now remember, I'm trying to solve for P, right? I want to know what is the stock price that's going to be equal to a 35% margin level, right? That's where this 0.35 lines up with the left-hand side of the equation. And then you simply divide that by whatever the stock value is, which again is just 1,000p in this scenario. So if you do the math, if you cross multiply and then collect your p's, you get p is equal to $30.77. Now I know that that was a very long explanation, but again, you know, we're not covering any of this in class, and so I want to be really detailed in these videos. And this is taking way longer than I thought it would, and so for this one problem, so I'm probably going to shut the video down after this one problem and do another video for number 16, because uploading these videos takes a really long time, and it's easier if I do it in smaller chunks. But anyway, getting back to this problem. The price is $30.77. So what does that mean? Okay, the stock price can fall all the way down to $30.77 before you get a margin call. The stock price has only fallen to $35. So no, the price is still above $30.77. This is the price that would trigger that margin call. So you're good. You bought Disney at 40, you're on margin for 20,000, 50%, right? You have all the way until that thing falls to $30.77 until you need to post any additional margin. So I really hope that was helpful for you guys, and I really hope that that makes, you know, some of your homework problems a lot more manageable, more easier to digest, and most importantly, I hope it really accelerates your movement up the learning curve. So I'll see you guys here in about 45 seconds for number 16.